Have you ever wanted to start your own religion? Of course you have. But you probably think to yourself, how would I know where to start? Who would follow me? And if they did, and even if I became successful, how would my conscience bear the millions and millions who kill and die in my name? Well, fear not, people. All of the ins and outs will be explained to you today. We have on COCHISE Conversations, we are joined today by someone who has, in fact, started his own religion, Sierra Vista's own Dr. Dennis Hickman. He's going to tell you in a second here about the religion he created and what the idea behind it is. We are broadcasting today from Malinoko Solution Studios in North Central Sierra Vista. They are our host sponsor. We also want to celebrate our unintentional, unwitting sponsor, Hot Knot IPA from Four Peaks Brewing in Tempe, Arizona. Delicious IPAs that help lubricate this conversation. And of course, our host sponsors, Herald Review Media. We couldn't do any of this without them. So Dennis, what sparked initially the idea to start your religion, which you actually call a religion substitute, right? Kind of like an egg substitute.
Yeah, in the past I would be associating with various people who expressed ideas which worried me, and they were often anti-government, and they were anti-knowledge and anti-science and anti-everything that's good. And so it occurred to me that there is often this tendency people have to say cynicism is really bad and it's the worst thing in the world.
Right.
But I don't think that's true. Cynicism recognizes that people do things in part for selfish reasons. And so that's where high cynicism comes from. There are low cynics who are the ones who are anti-knowledge, anti-everything that's good.
Right.
And they have basically, this is just an accident that I didn't know that Trump was ever going to show up and run for president.
I mean, the idea, it starts with the kind of idea about the sort of semantics of it, of what a cynic, what it means to be a cynic, which is the old Greek idea, whether the dog thing, right?
Right. And the ancient cynics wanted to be like dogs, which means they, I suppose, poop or pee wherever they want to. That was part of the idea. And they, of course, weren't entirely popular in ancient Greece. But now we call people cynics often just because they're dishonest. And that's okay with me, but I don't think if someone's just dishonest.
I would say, like, right now, the modern interpretation of cynic is somebody who assumes the worst about people's intentions, right? Like,
there's something to that, but I kind of refuse to assume the worst. I mean, yes, I do. I think people are horrible, but and that's one of our doctrines, is that people are idiots.
We'll get to that in a second.
But I don't think that calling everything cynical makes any sense. And often people who are cynical are right about things. So when I was reading Jane Austen, I was doing my PhD and my dissertation on Jane Austen, it occurred to me that she was one of these people who recognized that selfishness is a part of good behavior, as well as it's also a part of bad behavior. And so that's why I have high cynics who are good and low cynics who are incredibly, horribly bad.
Okay, so now we're going back to the early 90s when you were working on your dissertation at Arizona State University. You can get this at the library at Arizona State University if you ask for Chuck.
Really
Chuck
great.
will know where to take you. You might have to go into the bowels of the library there to find it, but it is there, and it is on record. It's called Imaginism and Literariness in Jane Austen's Emma by Dennis Ray Hickman. So that was your dissertation. So let's talk about how you got. So then you kind of create your own religion, or what you call like a religion substitute, which is kind of like, I think, like an egg substitute. Can you explain that idea? It's
right. Really while I was doing this, creating T-shirts, for one thing, this is the only T-shirt religion that I'm aware of, and the first in the world, and it's been such a great experience doing T-shirts. But it's also part of the whole point of this so-called religion is to make fun of religion and to clarify claims that religions make. Okay, and so the claims that my religion makes, which I don't want to call it a religion now, but it's okay. I called it a belief system for a while, which is a dumb term. Yeah. But so I'm not exactly sure what to call it. But it's a T-shirt. It's a T-shirt selling enterprise, which is not just like any dumb capitalist enterprise. It's selling T-shirts that say intelligent things. Now, do I have a T-shirt today? No, but I have an old one, but they're almost all gone. And
Yeah.
I sold T-shirts to all these students I taught overseas. Okay, and of
You
course,
sold them to the students?
of course, I sold them to the students. These are students who were going to these schools which charge $25,000 a year, roughly, to go there, and so they could afford my T-shirts. And so they really didn't. I don't think the students ever bought into the religion, meaning that they're not always going to go out and be martyrs for high cynicism. But the idea amused them, and so they were willing to buy my T-shirts. So all over the world now, in Kazakhstan, in Malaysia, in various other places where we taught, in Turkey, there are you will run into students wearing these T-shirts. Although I've never actually seen one, but it could happen.
Well, so there is kind of I don't know if serious is a word or a more meaningful part of high cynicism, and it kind of goes to the religion substitute thing. So in a way, you're acknowledging that humans have an innate need for something like religion, but maybe for some people they might be lactose intolerant. They might need a milk substitute or an egg substitute. Like it doesn't sit well with them. So you're creating something that scratches that itch, that basic human itch for something that is like a connection to the divine, and you're replacing it with something you think is more nutritious.
Yes, it's more nutritious and it is less false. Okay, and so no, it's funny. In various places, at one point in Turkey, we stayed there for 4 years, and we taught at Tarsus American College, which is a school. It's not. It's a college prep place. Anyway, at one point, the person who was the director had got a call from some parent who said I was spreading this religion. Okay, so and in Turkey, of course, religion is such a mess there. I mean, you can't. It's too complicated.
Yeah.
But at any rate, he said he wanted to know all about it. So I gave him a list of some commandments I had, which are just kind of dumb. And
we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, what happened in this?
And I showed him the T-shirt, and which was one of the T-shirts I was selling to people. And he said, "Oh yeah, well this is okay." Anyway, I mean, the person who was complaining was just trying to get points for her kid, hoping that the kid could get better grades or something, which is just dumb. And at any rate, that was one of the times when I got in horrible trouble, but not really.
Well, hold on, it's persecution. When you're
I was being
religion,
persecuted.
You're being persecuted.
I was being horribly persecuted.
Yes,
and of course, anyone who looks at the religion knows that it's there to make fun of conventional religions. Okay, which is, I think, an absolutely important thing for a religion or whatever you want to call it to do. So if it's a T-shirt enterprise that is about religion, it should be making fun of religion. And some of the material for high cynicism comes out of the novels of Jane Austen, and so I think of her as being the great high cynicism
prophet.
Maybe not prophet. I don't think she was aware.
Praise be unto her.
I don't know. I mean, she was completely right about everything.
Well, we'll get back to Jane Austen in a second, but you mentioned your commandments. Can you list off your commandments?
I can't list them, but I can tell.
Well,
there was a funny thing. So I tried to do some things that religions do, often unintentionally. And I had an 8 commandment version and a 15 commandment version. And I said, 30 years from now, when I'm gone, all these idiots will be fighting over whether the 15 commandment version or the 8 commandment version is better.
This reminds me of Mel Brooks in History of the World, where Moses comes down with the 3 tablets. I bring you 15 commandments, and he drops them. I bring you 10 commandments.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, of course the commandments are silly. I mean,
well, let's name off a couple of years. I remember.
Okay, a couple of things that I wanted to emphasize, and they probably don't matter as much to me now, but one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that people shouldn't do something because they shouldn't believe in something because it's difficult to believe. And often in religions, there's this tendency to act like, I have to tell the most absurd story or you won't think it's a religion. And of course, the absurd story could be Mary being assumed into heaven, or Jesus ascending into heaven, or Muhammad going for a ride on his white stallion that he flew in the air from Mecca to Jerusalem. So, you probably don't believe most of the story, but that's part of the point of this religion, to point out how silly religions can be. Another commandment I had a commandment about false precision. In other words, I kind of didn't like it when people were always pretending they knew something very precisely that they didn't know. But right now, I don't care too much about that. And
But you also had some stuff like Scotch goes with anything, I think.
oh yeah, well there are these kind of um, rules about eating and so forth, which are just, I think, good health.
Yeah.
So you can have scotch with chocolate and
That's true.
many things. Scotch goes with chocolate cake, and I think that's wonderful. And it's something that if somebody doesn't know, they could.
So that's sort of there to clear the palate, as it were, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, I guess so. And it's there. I kept saying to people, here are some of the rules that would really govern this great T-shirt enterprise. And so Matthew believes, or remember some of them. That's good. Other things that I said, I mean, I really thought that people should try to find something to believe in that is rational. And for the most part, that's not religion, you know. For a while, I was kind of bothered by the whole God thing, but now I've left the God thing.
Well, I think if you ever fall short or miss the mark on these, well, if you sin against these commandments, the best part about high cynicism, I think, that goes back to the core of what it is if you have sinned, your penance and your repentance and your forgiveness, what do you do each time?
You have a beer.
No. I can't believe I have to tell you your own.
Yeah, you have to tell me. See, I forgot.
You buy a T-shirt.
Oh, yes, you could buy. Yeah,
no matter how many sins.
No, I mean that was one thing I said, kidding, that you could make up for sin by buying a T-shirt. But of course, I was just kidding, and everybody knew that. And if somebody ever sued me and said God didn't forgive me, I'd just say I was kidding, and there is no God.
So well, I think there is the part of it that's making fun of religion. Lots of people do that. Comics do that. But I think what's interesting and maybe more prescient to our times is that we need new religions. We need new faiths. We need new myths. Like last week, I went to go see Jordan Peterson in concert in Tucson, and I know you're not a huge fan of his, but I would kind of wonder if it's not what he's doing is not a religion substitute, because it's not. He doesn't necessarily believe in God as a living being. He's just saying it's almost like I think I described it as Kierkegaard and Joseph Campbell kind of reincarnated, or he's stealing from both of them or whatever.
Right.
But like there's kind of this need in society to have that feeling of that connection to the divine without putting a name on it or
and it's so great to have a divine T-shirt. That is probably the most direct way to connect to the divine, which is a word I would never use, of course.
But there's a hunger for. I mean, I look at Jordan Peterson and I think he's kind of got a conservative following. He's been canceled from liberal universities in Canada and whatnot, so he's got that kind of conservative following, but he's real. Well, 50 years ago, the kind of things he's preaching would be considered heresy by most traditional Christian circles.
That's interesting. See, I kind of, when I've listened to a bunch of the debates he had with Sam Harris and other people, and he's always coming back to Jung or Joseph Campbell or somebody or something that the skeptics, the educated people, would call woo.
Yeah.
And it's always woo. And actually, it's funny because Sam Harris has reacted to.
But that's funny. I don't know that I'd call that woo. The idea that you if you, that sort of thing that it's just kind of like there's not necessarily a God there, but it's the sort of thing that makes you aspire to something or think that you should do better, or is that woo, or is that just like what's built into us internally?
Well, no, woo is when you make a claim that has no basis in fact. Okay, so I mean, a main thing about high cynicism is that we recognize that there is such a thing as truth, even though all these wackos around today go around saying, "Oh, there's no such thing as truth." Well, of course there is, and if you make that statement, you're contradicting yourself. You're saying this statement I'm making is true, but there's no other true statement.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly see in kind of fake news and out there how truth has completely become subjective. Especially, you wouldn't have thought that necessarily would come so much from the right as it's become, because I would think if you go back 50 years, you go to like William F. Buckley was probably more of a guy who would think is like telling the truth versus somebody like who might have been on the left in those days, who might be more idealistic or fanciful with the truth.
Well, no, I think that people, if somebody goes to college and start, they take philosophy 101, the typical thing they say to show how smart they are is there's no such thing as the truth. And anybody educated in philosophy knows that's idiocy. Of course, you can't have just one statement that says there's no such thing as the truth, and then all other statements are false.
Well, we could go down a rabbit hole there. Maybe we will on a separate issue. What is truth? But I mean, some of that is semantic. Some of it is.
Well, no, I think that this is really old in the philosophical tradition. So that you can't say there's no such thing as truth. It's just a lazy and kind of stupid thing to do. But okay, I get that people like to act out when it comes to issues concerning philosophy or religion or whatever.
Yeah, these are all issues we can jump into in future episodes. But let's go back to like creating your own religion. What advice? So imagine you're here watching this. You're one of the millions watching this podcast at home that we're broadcasting from Malinoco Solutions Studios in North Central Sierra Vista. Malinoco.com for all of your estate planning, data forensics, and whatever else you need. They might even bury a body for you. We don't know. We also want to thank our unwitting sponsors, Hop Knot IPA from Four Peaks Brewing in Tempe. They'll be very surprised if you mentioned you heard about them on this podcast. And also our broadcast partners. We couldn't do this without Herald Review Media, www.myheraldreview.com. But Dennis, so let's say you're out there, you're one of the millions watching this, and you're like, what from someone who's made an attempt at starting their own religion, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to start their own religion substitute, as it were?
Oh, well, I think when I started this, it was mostly a joke. Well, okay, I often said to people, this religion is half a joke, which makes it half better than most religions because they're 100% jokes. And I get that it's a joke, and that makes me behave in a certain way. In other words, doing the bit about T-shirts is kind of funny. And
it is funny.
People like to buy T-shirts, and you can wear a T-shirt anywhere except probably to a wedding or something. But you can do a lot of things with religion. But it felt important to me to point out the way that religions fall apart, and often that by falling apart, they attract a lot of believers. I never really thought I would get a lot of believers, and actually that prophecy has turned out to be true. So I've never, except for the various students and other people who bought my T-shirt, I don't hear a lot about high cynicism. And when you have people who teach high school and college and whatever, I think they often notice that the thing that you say that's really, really important that you want them all to understand, often they missed that. They weren't paying attention that day. And even if you say it every day, they weren't paying attention every day. So I really didn't think I'd have a lot of success. And I also thought that religions often just become religions or become powerful because they have political connections, as in, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam. They all have political connections, which encourage people to join the religion and to follow it. And so I thought to myself, well, what political connections do I have? And I said, well, I did once belong to the ACLU. I quit it after a while. And anyway, I don't have a lot of great political connections. And how would you judge which political connection to have? In other words, people who are
well, okay, so let's jump to that. So don't you think MAGA needs its own religion? Because it's not Christian.
Yeah, but it has its own religion, which is wacko evangelical.
Yeah, but it's
Christians.
not. I mean, it's not. I mean, I guess it becomes its own sort of Christian.
It doesn't have a religion which it has adopted, but there is this Christian nationalism that
that's more of a political thing than a religious
but
thing.
I mean, most religions are partially political. Probably my religion is less political, so that makes it better, of course. Mm-hmm. And no, for example, one historian, I can't remember who, but I've read this account of how Islam got started. And it was a bunch of people who sat around in Damascus or someplace and said, we really need to unite the Middle East. And all these people really need to have a religion. So why don't we make up this guy called Muhammad, which means the praised one. It could have been anybody. We'll make up this guy Muhammad, and we pretend that he had contact with God and that he wanted you to join this religion and so forth. And that was going to be their way of controlling the area. I don't know that there's great evidence for that theory, but that is kind of the way you end up thinking about religions. And I was never approached by a member of some government who said, "Boy, I love the idea of your religion, and I really want to make it like the religion of my country." Nobody ever approached me, but I suppose I could have pursued that.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, no one's approached you yet, but after the millions watch this
Yes, after
podcast,
millions watch this thing.
the people are going to start thinking, and you're going to start moving in all kinds of weird political circles, I'm sure. Well, Dennis, we've run out of time. We've run out of beer from our unintentional, unwitting sponsor, Hop Knot IPA from Four Creeks Brewing in Tempe, Arizona. Check them out. Let them know you heard about us on COCHISE Conversations. We also want to thank our studio host sponsors from their studios in North Central Sierra Vista, Malinoco Solutions LLC, www.malinoco.com, and of course our host sponsor. We couldn't do it without them. Our broadcast sponsor, Herald Review Media, www.myheraldreview.com. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to do this again. Thank you, Dennis, for joining us and illuminating us on how to create your own religion.
Thanks. And if anybody wants advice, I'm probably the worst person to go to for religion.
He's too humble.
I'm too humble.
He's too humble. Look him up. Look him up. You'll find him. Thanks for joining us, and have a blessed day. Okay. Hopefully that recorded right. It would suck if we had to do that over again.